For our day out this week, we've come to the little town of Winchcombe in Gloucestershire, up here on the very northern edge of the Cotswolds. It's a small stone town and it lies deep in its valley with the Vale of Evesham stretching away behind it. Perhaps not so familiar as other Cotswold towns, Winchcombe has had its share of history, and indeed some 700 years ago was the mecca for thousands of pilgrims seeking absolution at two famous shrines. Today's pilgrims arrive by car along the A46, and also a surprising number on foot, for the Cotswold Way takes walkers right into the centre of the town. Before it gets there, though, the way passes one of the highlights of its route, Bellis Knap Long Barrow. A burial chamber of an Iron Age farming community, Bellis Knap is one of the best examples of what archaeologists call a false portal barrow. This elaborate entrance is actually a dummy, possibly to thwart grave robbers, or maybe to confuse evil spirits as to the whereabouts of the dead. In reality, the dead were buried in the sides of the mound, and over the years, the bones of some 30 people have been uncovered. As for the dry stone walling of the various entrances, 5 in all, it's largely original, evidence of a country craft that survived for at least 5,000 years. The Cotswold Way continues on down from the hills to enter Winchcombe by the way of Vineyard Street. This was previously known as Duck Street, not from wildfowl or even cricket, but from a ducking stool, which was set up on the bank to punish witches and scolds. The name Winchcombe is Saxon. It means the remote valley. Yet despite this remoteness, Kenwulf, King of Mercia, founded an abbey here way back in the 9th century. Cowle Lane and Abbey Terrace mark the southern limits of the abbey, which Kenwulf built and where he was eventually buried. The abbot's doorway survives, almost intact, in a private garden, and the position of the abbey's high altar is marked by a cross. Kenelm, a mere boy, succeeded his father, and then, as Bill Williams relates, fate took a hand.
One day his wicked sister, Gwendreth, said, "Come, boy, go into the woods and hunt with these friends of mine," you see. And they went north from Winchcombe, north, right up into... They got as far as Clent in Worcestershire and pitched camp for the night. And during the night, one of these fell friends of Gwendreth came and slaughtered the boy, severed his head from his body. And from the skull rose up a dove. And this dove fluttered away. Where did it end up? Of all places, in St. Peter's, Rome. It flew in to St. Peter's while the Pope was saying Mass. And providentially, there was an Englishman there who said, to the Pope, "I can tell you all about this. This is Kenelm, you see." And there and then, the Pope is alleged to have canonized Kenelm and said his remains must be brought and buried alongside the remains of his father in the great abbey in Winchcombe. And so he was brought by the monks, and everywhere the coffin rested overnight, a spring of beautiful pure water gushed up. And certainly the last resting place of the coffin was up on the hill here at Sudeley, and there to this day the spring is known as St. Kenelm's Well. Anyway, the body was brought, was buried alongside his father, and then the years passed. The pilgrims came to visit this wonderful shrine of the new saint. But then comes drama, because in the 1800s they excavated here more deeply, and they found 2 stone Saxon coffins, one big one, one little one. Was this Kenelm, and was this Kenelm? And those coffins can now be seen in the parish church over there at the west end.
Built in the 15th century, when Winchcombe's local economy was booming, St. Peter's Church was completed in just over 10 years in a single building operation. Classic of perpendicular architecture, its tower stands some 90 feet high, crowned with a superb gilded weathercock, one which used to be at St. Mary Redcliffe in Bristol. The outside of the church is well known for its 40 gargoyles, making their own comment on the proceedings from the safety of the chancel roof. Many are of devils and imps, but others are believed to represent local dignitaries, including Ralph Boteler, Lord of Sudeley Castle, who helped the parish pay for the church. Others, like this winged man in a top hat, are of a group known as the Winchcombe Worthies. Inside the church, there's a clear prospect down the nave to the east window. It shows St. Peter attempting to walk on water, a subject chosen, it's believed, by the then vicar 100 years ago. As a retired naval captain, he wanted to be reminded of his years afloat. At the other end are the coffins Bill Williams spoke of, dug up on the Abbey site in 1815. While on the rood screen nearby, look out for the carving which replaces a more usual rose. This cheeky fellow of florid complexion, known as the Winchcombe imp. Another treasure lies behind this curtain on the north wall, an altar cloth made up of two 14th century vestments with a later border bearing fruits traditionally supposed to have been embroidered by Catherine of Aragon, for the pomegranate was her emblem. The panel was once sent to the Royal School of Needlework for repair at the same time as some other work from Minsterworth near Gloucester. By a strange coincidence, this contained the missing panel of the crucifixion, but sadly the two pieces weren't reunited. Lastly, on the north wall of the chancel is the devout figure of Sir Thomas Williams, who died in 1636. The space opposite him was meant to have been filled by the effigy of his widow in the fullness of time, but she remarried and is interred elsewhere with her second husband. So poor Sir Thomas has knelt alone for nearly 350 years, giving new meaning to the phrase, perhaps, till death us do part. Winchcombe is a happy blend of architectural styles, and nowhere more so than in the streets around St. Peter's. There you'll find these much photographed cottages, given to the town by the Dent family of Sudeley Castle. And nearby, look out for Blaby House, a combination of traditional Cotswold stone with a continental-style mansard roof. Earlier lords of Sudeley, the Chandos family, built these almshouses in 1573 for 12 old ladies sharing a communal water pump. While next door, the Jacobean house was commissioned in 1618 by Winchcombe's bailiffs and burgesses as the town's first purpose-built school. Continuing down Gloucester Street, the nameplate of number 23 gives a clue to the subject, but not the extent of what lies beyond the door. It's Tim Petch's 20-year-old collection of paraphernalia from all parts of Britain's railway heritage. Tim Petchy.
Hello.
I found you at last.
That's right.
In this vast collection you have here. It's an incredible first sensation you get when you walk through the gates and see all the notices and numbers and goods wagons and things everywhere. How long have you been building up the collection?
Oh, something like 23 years. We first started in 1962.
So that was, I suppose, quite early on in the collection.
Those were the early days, and the stuff was more freely available in those days.
Does this thing work?
Oh, this thing works.
Oh! It makes the signal work over there. The cables go under the flower beds or something,
Yes,
do they?
go under the flower beds and around the trees and under the paths.
Have you got a signal box?
We've got a signal box, yeah.
Oh, well, let's go and have a look at it then, shall we?
Very well.
Oh, that's unbelievable, Tim. Where on earth did you get that from? Old Dalby, where's that?
Well, actually, the building's from Ashchurch, which is about 10 miles away.
Oh, yes, I know Ashchurch.
It was a Midland Railway Signal Department workshop.
This place must turn railway enthusiasts delirious with happiness to come in here.
Oh, they love this one. It's all full of ringing bells and levers. The kids love to pull the levers. The signalman's job was a very responsible one.
A responsible one?
A responsible one. He held the safety of everybody in his hands, as it were. But the mechanical devices he's got to use are made safe as far as they can be. These levers are interlocked to avoid any conflicting movements of signals and points.
Honestly, Tim, the variety of this museum of yours is absolutely mind-blowing.
Just one aspect of railways. It's a tremendously big subject.
But every nook and cranny of your house and garden and this signal box is crammed with bits and pieces of railway memorabilia.
There's room for a bit more yet.
I don't believe it. Look, do you think you've actually covered everything in your collection? You covered everything you need. Is there anything that's missing?
Nothing that's missing that I'm aware of, but I'm an opportunist.
There's one thing that is missing, I think.
What's that?
A train. You haven't got a train.
I haven't got a train, no.
You've probably got enough bits to make one.
Maybe, but people who've got engines haven't got the time or the resources to bother with the little bits, and it's the little bits that I like the most.
It's a pleasant stroll now back down Vineyard Street to Winchcombe's major tourist attraction, Sudeley Castle. Once a property of Ethelred the Unready, in the 15th century the estate passed to Ralph Butler, who as Baron Sudeley rebuilt the then castle as a stately home. The banqueting hall, with its great north window, is the most striking part of the ruins. Here too is the octagon tower, damaged by cannon fire during the English Civil War. The dungeon tower of Baron Sudeley's stately residence now forms a unique backdrop to one of the castle's visitor attractions, flying displays thrice weekly by Sudeley falconer Gary Cope, and in this instance, his lanner falcon, El Cid.
The fastest falcon really is the peregrine, and there's a lot of exaggeration about how quickly a peregrine can dive, what speed it can dive at, but I would say about 120 mile an hour. Cid, being a lanner falcon, being a lot slower, probably on a good day he can come in at about 70, 75. They've got very good eyesight. Their eyesight is about 8 times more powerful than that of a human being, so this is a very important factor, of course, when they're hunting. They rely upon their visual ability to spot their quarry.
Why the bell?
The bell is so that if we lose sight of the falcon, then we can still hear it. It's a medieval way of finding a lost falcon. Very useful when they bring something down in long grass or something. You may not be able to see the bird, but you can hear the bell ringing. I'm infatuated with the birds. I love birds of prey. I love to see them flying. I think they're beautiful in the air, stooping and twirling about as they do. I just feel very privileged to be in partnership with such a creature.
Sudeley has been open to the public on a regular basis since the late 1960s, and since then visitors have been arriving by the coachload, but mainly to see the castle, missing Winchcombe itself on its doorstep. And of the castle's most typical attractions, this is my particular favourite, the Rupert Room, with its magnificent four-poster. This belonged to Charles I and was found at a nearby farm where it had been kept for 200 years before finding its way back here. For a different sort of bedroom, just along the corridor, is this, the Needlework Room, a glimpse perhaps into the domestic life of Sudeley when the Dent family held sway here. While for a room with a stunning ceiling, look no further than Catherine Parr's nursery, with its walls covered with Elizabethan miniatures of the people of her time. Sudeley, at various times during its history, has played host to at least 6 kings and queens. George III played Humpty Dumpty when he came here and fell down the steps of the Octagon Tower. Fortunately for him, he landed on the housekeeper of the day, a Mrs. Cox, who saved him from serious injury. What happened to her, we don't know. But for her nephew, well, he received a commission in His Majesty's Army as a reward. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow, came to Sudeley in 1547. She married Thomas Seymour, but died of a fever a year later and was buried here in St. Mary's Chapel. This and the castle suffered very badly during the Civil War. The chapel was desecrated, Catherine's coffin thrown into the garden, and after the war, the castle fell into decay, being used at one point as a pub. And so it might have remained, had it not been for the Dent brothers, glove makers of Worcester, who restored both castle and chapel and erected this marble tomb for Henry's queen, whose coffin had been found containing her body in a remarkable state of preservation. Their work was carried on by the most famous of Sudeley's Victorians, Emma Dent Brocklehurst. She made Sudeley her life's work, oversaw the final remodelling of the structure, both inside and out, and was an untiring collector of furniture, manuscripts, and priceless works of art. On the wall of the library is just one of those masterpieces, the late 16th century Sheldon tapestry. Originally woven as a tablecloth, it's a product of the first English tapestry factory set up at Barcheston, Warwickshire, and uses the popular imagery of virtues and vices to embroider the central story, Adam and Eve being expelled from paradise. The present lady of the manor was born Elizabeth Chipps in Kentucky and married Mark Dent Brocklehurst in 1963. Beautiful first impression that you get of Sudeley from Bellasnap, from the edge of the Cotswolds.
Yes, up on the top.
And it's an absolutely stunning situation, isn't it?
Mm.
Do you remember what your first view of Sudeley was?
My first view of Sudeley was at night, actually, because I came down with my late husband, Mark Brocklehurst, but it was before we were even engaged. And we came midnight, I think it was, and all the electricity was off in the house. So my first impression was quite different from the one you get from the top of the hill.
Mark Dent Brocklehurst died tragically in 1972, leaving considerable death duties. Aggressive marketing went a good way towards paying off these debts, and Elizabeth has remarried to Lord Ashcombe, a Sudeley trustee. Now, after some time in London, the family have returned to Sudeley for good.
There's a long tradition, really, of Sudeley and the people of Sudeley and Winchcombe. And
yes, that goes back to Emma Dent, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yes.
What do you hope that Sudeley, the memories that people will take away with them from Sudeley?
I'd like people to feel that they have seen and felt some of the atmosphere of the history that's gone on here, because it's an intriguing history. It's gone on for over 1,000 years in these hills.
And what about yourself as an American? What do you think you can give to, what particular angle can you give to Sudeley?
I think perhaps as an American, maybe I appreciate what's here very much, because there's nothing like this in America. And I feel very lucky to be involved in it.
And the Americans, of course, pour into Sudeley on the tourist trail. And it comes as some surprise when they find a southern belle as the lady of an English castle. Back in Winchcombe, we come to High Street and the George Inn, right in the centre of the town. Pilgrims visiting the holy shrines would stop here for food and shelter. Under the stairway to their dormitory, a further relic, the stone bath they would have used. The inn had the Norman name Le Georges until the 1500s and was rebuilt by Winchcombe's last but one abbot, Richard Kidminster. His initials can be seen on the top of the archway leading into the galleried courtyard. Opposite the George, at the junction of North, High and Hale Street, is the town hall and the former courtroom. The stocks outside remind us that here punishment was meted out till as recently as 1860. Upstairs, in what used to be the judges' chambers, is Winchcombe's small folk museum collection. Pride of place, going to a handful of remains from Bella Snap, a deer horn and several human teeth and bones. There are mosaic fragments and a sizable chunk of pavement from one of the Roman villas set up on the slopes of the sheltered valley, and 2 corbel heads believed to have come from the ruins of Winchcombe Abbey. As for local character, you can choose between Emma Dent, looking remarkably like Queen Victoria, or this chap, Shepherd Wiggins of Hales, posing proudly in front of the smock he used to wear. And that's where I say goodbye to Winchcombe, because I'm going to take the old Pilgrim's Way down to Hales Abbey, perhaps in the footsteps of Shepherd Wiggins. The path from Winchcombe to Hales Abbey, the Pilgrim's Way, was once paved and now forms part of the Cotswold Way as it passes through Winchcombe on its way from Bath to Chipping Campden. It's waymarked throughout with an arrow and a dot by volunteers of the Cotswold Warden Service. One such is local historian David Donaldson.
Our job is really to try and smooth the path, smooth the way, if you like, because whenever one has many people enjoying themselves in the countryside, that puts pressure on the countryside as a resource, as we're now told to call it.
So the modern pilgrims are the backpackers and with their hiking boots.
That's right. And frankly, they can do a lot more damage than the medieval pilgrim ever did. So the Warden Service tries to smooth the path. The sorts of things we do are clearing footpaths, making sure that people behave responsibly in the countryside.
Well, we've got to make our way through that field of sheep at the moment. I'll come through the gate and join you. And you rely on people to shut gates behind them, as always, of course, don't you?
And to secure them after they've shut them.
Is that all right, Mr. Warden?
I think that's fine.
Right, you'll do.
Let's go.
Down to the Abbey. In 1242, Richard, Earl of Cornwall, was returning to England from the Crusades. In danger of being wrecked off the Scillies, he vowed that if his life was spared, he would build an abbey. Well, his prayer was answered, and the abbey he built, with a community of 20 monks, became the Cistercian Abbey of Hales. The abbey church was over 340 feet long, 60 feet wide, with a tower over the crossing. The lifestyle was simple, great emphasis being placed on the value of manual labour in the service of God. And that's how it would have remained, except that in 1270, Hales was given a phial of Christ's blood, authenticated by the man who was later to become Pope Urban IV.
This would bring the Abbey of Hales, which was a Cistercian foundation, unlike Winchcombe, which was Benedictine, straight away into the forefront of English abbeys and places of pilgrimage, because pilgrims would want to come and worship at the shrine which contained the phial of the Holy Blood. This would be as good in terms of pilgrimage as the shrine of St. Kenelm in Winchcombe. So these two abbeys were merely a mile and a half apart and would be a centre in Gloucestershire for pilgrimage.
What did they do with this precious relic?
They would have kept it with great reverence and great care within the Abbey Church. And of course that meant that they built a very special shrine for it. And behind us here, where the high altar was situated, would have been where the relic was shown to pilgrims, who would have come from all parts of this land to worship at the shrine at Hales. But in addition to the high altar, they built, as you can see around us, this structure in about 1270, where they attempted to show even greater reverence for the relic. This was in the shape of a rose petal chapel and structure, and it enabled pilgrims to circulate round at the back of the altar.
It's something of a surprise to come here to these ruins and find out how important Hales Abbey was. But wasn't there also some doubt cast on the truth of the holy relic of Christ's blood?
Doubt, as you say, crept into the authenticity of all relics, and eventually, in the later Middle Ages, instructions were given that relics should be yielded up, and in fact in 1538 the phial of the Holy Blood of Hales was yielded up, and it was transferred to London on Henry VIII's orders, and we read that it was analysed. Who analysed it, I do not think anybody can tell you. But what is recorded is that the Bishop of Rochester preached after the analysis in 1538 to the effect that the blood was in fact a solution of honey, as he said, coloured with saffron, and that was the basis of the Holy Blood of Hales. But of course what we need to remember now is that regardless of what its authenticity may have been, for the pilgrims who came here, it was a holy place, and this was a relic of supreme importance and a place where they sought forgiveness for their sins.
A museum in the grounds brings together some of the more impressive remains of the abbey. Tiles like these would have covered the whole floor. 6 inches square, they were probably made in a kiln quite close to the abbey, and were decorated with coats of arms and heraldic devices, all fired in 16-tile sets, like this particular section of floor. There are some 15th century vaulting bosses from the cloister roof, which bear the arms of local families, and some earlier ones from the abbey chapter house. The centre boss shows Christ as a spiritual Samson wrestling with the lion. Like the others, originally painted and gilded, its richness of ornament indicates the importance of the chapter house in the life of the community. For after the church proper, it was the chapter house with its arched doorway and vaulted roof that played the central role in the life of the monastery. Here, in what was a silent order, the monks gathered daily to hear a chapter from the rule of St. Benedict. The parlour was the only room where conversation was freely allowed, unless, perhaps, you count the monks' communal lavatory in the monastery, where presumably any conversation they did have, as they sat side by side, would have been drowned by the cleansing, rushing waters underneath. A considerable engineering feat, the drain is fed by a spring and runs right across the grounds before emerging in fields to the west of the abbey. Stone vaulted throughout, its complex construction shows that however simple the monastic life may have been, the Cistercians appreciated the value of good hygiene, although even this couldn't prevent an attack of the Black Death in 1361, when many of the monks and lay brothers perished. But the ultimate disaster occurred with the dissolution of the monasteries. On Christmas Eve 1539, Abbot Stephen Sagar and 21 monks handed Hales over to Thomas Cromwell's commissioners. 3 years later, it was sold to a dealer in second-hand monasteries, and soon after that, it seems the abbey church was demolished. Well, it's time for me to end my day out in Winchcombe, in its vale of the Cotswold Hills. And here on the wall of the cloister at Hales Abbey is a Latin inscription in the words of St. Bernard, the founder saint of the Cistercian order. And it reads, "It is good for us to be here. Man lives more purely, falls more rarely, dies more happy. He is cleansed more readily and sent on his way more richly provided." Warm sentiments indeed for the medieval pilgrim on his day out.
Well, with the National Garden Festival now open at Stoke-on-Trent in next week's Day Out, St John Howell takes a leisurely look at some of the other attractions in the 6 towns of the Potteries. And that's in Day Out next Friday evening at 8 o'clock.